This episode of New Politics was released on the 14th of June, 2025, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Whadjuk people.
Big hello to our audience and a big hello to you, David. Another big week in politics this week.
It seems to be getting bigger and bigger each week. And a hello to you too, Eddie. Things aren't settling down, although the government seems to be coping. It's not a chaotic government, but things are just getting bigger and bigger.
Well, there's a lot of chaos in other parts of the world at the moment, but we've got another big episode. We're looking at Scott Morrison returns to haunt us yet again. There's a lot of chaos going on in the United States. Anthony Albanese starts mapping out the plans for the next parliamentary term. There's some small sanctions that are being placed on two Israeli ministers, and there's more chaos in Tasmania as well. So, David, lots to talk about this week.
It'll be great. I cannot wait.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. You can listen in, share, subscribe and support New Politics at Patreon and Substack. It's just $5 per month. Or you can donate directly at our website at newpolitics.com.au. And of course, all of this is a good way to support independent journalism. We had the annual King's Birthday Honours announced during the week, and Scott Morrison was awarded the Companion of the Order of Australian for his leadership and management of the national COVID response when he was the Prime Minister. Now, just want everyone to stop laughing for a minute, but this follows on from his failure to secure enough vaccines when they first became available in 2021. He was trying to politicise COVID as much as possible. Most of the work was left up to the state premiers and chief ministers. He was dragged kicking and screaming to implement the JobKeeper program that was recommended by the unions at the time. Even still, that was also botched. He wanted to open up the borders as quickly as possible against the medical advice that was provided by the chief medical officers. And to top it all off, he blamed China for causing the COVID virus, and that resulted in a ban on key Australian goods being exported into China, and it created a big diplomatic problem with China that's only been resolved since the Albanese government came into office. Now, the Companion Award, that is the highest honour that can be given in Australia, and it's for eminent achievement and merit of the highest degree in service to Australia or humanity. And I don't think either of those apply to Scott Morrison. And aside from his COVID incompetence, there was also his secrecy, the corruption while he was in office, robo-debt, scandal after scandal, economic mismanagement. And it's hard to think of a more undeserving public figure to receive this award. And if people like Scott Morrison are receiving a Companion of Australia award, well, there's obviously a problem with the way that these awards are handed out.
There are some pretty fine people who have genuinely had national achievement that has gone otherwise unrecognised. I was going through the Prime Ministers right back to Federation, and really the only one I think would deserve the highest was John Curtin, who literally gave his health and life for World War II. He went way beyond what he needed to do to be World War II leader. Every other Prime Minister more or less performed in the job. Some performed really, really well. Some performed fine. Some were okay, and then there's Scott Morrison. It's a baffling decision given how much contempt he is held in by the electorate. I note when the rage started spreading across social media, there was very little defence of the, oh no, he's Prime Minister, he should have it, or most of the right-wing criticisms thought he was too soft on COVID and allowed the vaccines in under pressure from the woke states, believe it or not. And when I say right-wing, I don't mean that is typical of your normal person who leans to the right. This is cooker nonsense. No moderate right-winger seemed to defend him or seemed to agree. They didn't say very much, and that's That's okay. I get that. But there was a lot of opprobrium. We put out an article on Monday, which I'd written quite a bit of, and I was just appalled. These types of things should be given for outstanding achievement, not for scamming your way into a job, doing nothing except carve it up for you and your mates and leave the country in a worse state than when you found it. I don't see how that qualifies as anything resembling the type of thing that these types of awards should be given out for.
And before people start having a go at us, it shouldn't just be a case of opposing some of these awards just because we don't like these people or we might be opposed to them ideologically, but what realistically have some of these people done? Scott Morrison was clearly incompetent, and that's just not our opinion. The Australian electorate arrived at the same conclusion when they voted this guy out at the 2022 federal election. He was the first leader in any jurisdiction in Australia, state, federal or territory, to lose an election since COVID started. He was the first one. All the other ones were rewarded with massive majorities, but Scott Morrison was the first one to be booted out. And it's not just him. There's been other controversies with these awards in recent times. Margaret Court was given one of these awards in 2021 for services to tennis, of all things, even though her tennis career finished almost 50 years ago. Bettina Arndt given an award in 2020. This is after she ran a fake rape crisis tour at universities around Australia and trivialised sexual assault against women. Why does she get an award? Ben Roberts-Smith received an award in 2014. And that was based on information that was fabricated. And I know that some of this is a leftover of the Liberal Party's culture war processes. They stacked the committees of these types of merit bodies so that they could continuously give out awards to like-minded people, conservative types. And this is the end result. Got a Prime Minister with no merit getting a merit award. And there's just no basis for this.
None at all. In fact, I remember being critical of Victorian Premier Dan Andrews getting such an award. And he's got more of a claim to it than Scott Morrison ever did. I don't think politicians should get this stuff. And I know that it's part of the trade and parcel of politicians, but it shouldn't be. Years back, I used to occasionally give references for people getting the awards because of the position I was in. And the vast majority of the people I was very happy to give a reference to because I knew them to be quiet local workers who did a lot well beyond most volunteerism, who did it not for the glory, there was no money in it. They did it because it was something that they felt needed to be done. And it included local historians, but the soccer coaches, the netball coaches, the presidents of various committees, the Meals on Wheels providers, all types of people, the scout leaders and Cubs and Girl Guides, decades and decades of unpaid work. And this person couldn't do a worse job, really, or I suppose he could have done a worse job. We didn't quite get to Trump land, but we were heading there. Couldn't have damaged things more without further catastrophe and gets a bauble to wear around and put on his letterhead. I don't think Kevin Rudd should have one. I don't think Julia Gillard should have one. I don't think John Howard should have one. I think that politicians should be excluded. I also think that people whose profession pays them well. As a musician, I get uneasy when I see that top-flying musicians have it because the top-flying ones live in nice houses. They've got a good income. They're praised by their fans every day. And that's great. I'm not knocking that at all. But do they then want an award on top of that? And, of course, a lot of them would say no. And, some people do knock them back. But I just think that it should be for people who would otherwise go unrecognised.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. There's, these awards should just be given out for true community work because there's a lot of people that work behind the scenes that don't get any recognition at all. And sure, the work of the Prime Minister is difficult work, but
sure,
this is just what we expect from the Prime Minister. It's what we expect the Prime Minister to do. And you've referred to Paul Keating before. He refused to accept the award in 1997, saying that it's not for people like him, it's to recognise the value of people who normally don't get the accolades for their work and don't actually seek it out either. Rupert Murdoch, he also refused to accept his award, but that's because, accepting it would have jeopardised his case for US citizenship and the subsequent owner of media networks in the United States.
He did take a Vatican knighthood.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of cynicism there, of course, but there'd be ways to fix all of this up. Maybe have a standalone award if they do want to give out an award, just a standalone award for the Prime Minister, so there's no contention about this. Maybe a little plaque, a T-shirt, gift voucher at DJs or JB Hi-Fi, something like that, dinner out with your mates. But definitely there needs to be more transparency about the people who are on these panels, and maybe have a broader range of people making these selections, and also a clear process and criteria for how these people are selected. And maybe ultimately it doesn't really matter. Scott Morrison is always going to be in the Hall of Shame as far as I'm concerned, and it doesn't really matter how many awards he's given. That's not going to change my opinion of him, and maybe that applies for a lot of other people as well.
He's probably at the point where if he pulled all the children out of a burning orphanage, you'd yell at him for getting smoke on their clothes. His reputation is such that it's really irredeemable, and the best thing he could do is to retire quietly somewhere and never be heard from again, which I haven't said for any other Prime Minister except for maybe Tony Abbott. But even Tony Abbott has been relatively quiet publicly.
Well, they all end up getting their portrait painted up at the Parliament House as well. So maybe that's symbolic enough.
Yeah, I think having done the job should be remembered. But yeah, getting your portrait at Parliament House, getting the nice pension, the office, the gold travel pass.
And maybe a park or a roundabout named after them as well?
Yeah.
Or a small bridge.
If you've done really well, a building, a street in Canberra somewhere. If you've done really, really well, a suburb in Canberra. Does having an AC or an OAM or an AM or whatever really improve your status that much? My guess is that Morrison, at some level, understands that he is absolutely despised and is trying to force himself into a kind of respectability. Oh, I've got an AC. This is the wrong country for that type of stuff. We like baubles that are earned, but we don't really think that they are terribly exciting, particularly if you haven't earned it.
The problems in the United States seem to be deepening, with the protests in Los Angeles continuing this week with no end in sight. And this follows on from the immigration and customs enforcement that was ordered by the US President, Donald Trump, and that was to remove people involved in illegal immigration. And this has been totally over the top. There's almost 5,000 National Guards and Marines involved in this action, and it's resulted in tourists being arrested and deported. People who've got a valid legal reason to be a resident in the United States have also been arrested and deported. Social media accounts and mobile phones are being checked, and if you said the wrong thing on Instagram, such as Free Palestine or I don't love the state of Israel, well, you get deported as well. There's been the use of rubber bullets, pepper spray, tear gas and stun guns. Donald Trump has also called for the arrest of the Governor of California, Gavin Newsom. We've also had journalists being shot at, including the Australian journalist Lauren Tomasi in this incident.
After hours of standing off, this situation has now rapidly deteriorated. The LAPD moving in on horseback, firing rubber bullets at protesters, moving them on through the heart of LA.
You just shut the You okay?
I'm good.
Are you okay?
Where? Where did it hit you? Just my leg. I'm good.
Fascists! Report that they're fascists! You're okay. You're not okay. Hurt. Fascists!
This is the behaviour of a tin pot regime, and the United States has had a history of these types of brutal actions in the past. There were the LA riots in 1992. There's been various killings by state police at universities over the past few decades. If you're a black person or your skin colour is different, it tends to happen all the time. And generally, the more repressive a regime is, the more insecure the leadership. And Donald Trump is a very insecure president. And this sort of behaviour is documented in this great book by Frank Dicotta, How to Be a Dictator. I highly recommend it. And in the book, he indicates that most despots and dictators are highly insecure and pathological narcissists. And who does that remind you of? Donald Trump, of course. So the United States is becoming a more unstable country. It's got a president who seems to change his mind about everything every single day of the week. There's no consistency in what he's trying to achieve. No one knows what the end game is. And the tariff situation is a very good example of this. And it's not a case where long-term arrangements with one country can end overnight and then another one starts up the following day. But to me, this just seems to be a dangerous point for the United States. And Australia just needs to be more alert to what's going on over there and start moving away from the United States.
The world is changing. We mightn't like it. We might rage against the dying of the light, as it were, but Trump is really a symptom rather than the cause of it. I think we need to face facts. I love the United States. I love the people of the United States who I've met. I don't think we'd get passport visa clearances at the moment, Eddie. They're knocking back all kinds of people who've said a lot less on social media than we have in a critical sense.
Well, maybe that's a good idea. You might not want people like us going into the United States.
That's true. But it's one of those things where the system is dying. And it's funny how often these things just quietly go, in a sense. But we're seeing the US kicking it and screaming its way to some kind of obscurity. Of course, it could turn around, but I think even turning around will only slow the process and make it a bit more orderly. And it does upset me to say that. The United States brought a lot of ill to the world, don't get me wrong, but it also brought a lot of good to the world. Movies, jazz, blues, rock and roll, literature, television, really. And I know TV was invented by English, but the way we do and watch television was very American-centric. There is a large amount of sadness watching this institution die, but there's also an air of inevitability. All empires, all great powers, all superpowers. We've only had two superpowers, and we watched one die and we're watching the other one die now. They all die. Everything must pass. I guess the thing to do is keep your head down and see what happens at the end.
And locally, there's also been that odd subservience to the United States. We talked a little bit about this last week, about the behaviour of Richard Marles, the Defence Minister, who couldn't lick the boots of America quickly enough. And this week it's the media in response to an Australian journalist being shot. And every media outlet in Australia reported the shooting of Lauren Tomasi. They reported this almost apologetically, that she was caught in the crossfire and somehow managed to get in the way. And the evidence clearly shows that she was obviously a reporter doing her job, and it clearly shows one of the National Guard raising their gun and shooting at Lauren Tomasi and hitting her. And there's people who are saying, well, it's only rubber bullets, what's the big deal? But rubber bullets can still kill you. They can still cause serious harm and damage. Otherwise they'd just use a pop gun or something from Toy Story. It's not like that. It's
glitter.
Yeah, but it's violence and it's intimidation. And initially, in response to this incident, the Prime Minister said that the government and democratic institutions, including a free media, can meet the demands of global uncertainty. And I don't even know what that means, but that's what Anthony Albanese said the other day. And then he probably realised the errors of his ways, and then he said something a lot more forceful.
That footage was horrific. That was the footage of an Australian journalist doing what journalists do at their very best, which is to go into an environment that's not comfortable, but where in LA it is not unreasonable to think that she would not have been targeted with a rubber bullet. It is not unreasonable to think that she could go about her coverage clearly, as people can see the footage, clearly identified as media. And so we have already raised these issues with the US administration. We don't find it acceptable that it occurred, and we think the role of the media is particularly important.
And for sure, David, the governments have to be careful when they're calling out these things if they're also dealing with the nutcase president in the United States, but at least for a domestic audience, because whatever Anthony Albanese says about this incident, it's not going to be broadcast in the United States. It's going to be mainly broadcast in Australia, and call out what people can clearly see with their own eyes. A US National Guard shooting at an Australian journalist, well, that just needs to be condemned, irrespective of which country is perpetrating those actions.
It was clearly a deliberate shot at her. You're supposed to bounce the bullets off the ground when you're using rubber bullets because, as you said, there's a risk of severe injury or even death through percussion. And the fact that they're shooting at journalists who are protected under the laws of warfare, and I know it's not necessarily warfare, but they're protected under the laws of police actions too, unless the journalist is breaking the law by A, participating in an illegal activity, or B, doing something illegal of their own cognition, and genuinely they should be allowed to do their work properly. And this thug just turns the gun on her and shoots her in the leg. Now, to her credit, she said she was fine, she was okay. I can understand why Channel 9 was a bit muted, because there's going to be a workers' compensation claim and they've got to work out who's responsible. Will it go to the city of Los Angeles, the National Guard, or will Channel 9's insurance, or a combination of all three, have to pay for it? So I get Channel 9 being a little bit muted. I don't get the rest of the Australian media, because it could have been any of them. And for the ABC to call it a crossfire.
It wasn't just the ABC, it was also SBS, Channel 9, Channel 10, Channel 7, all of them. They just said there was crossfire, but we can clearly see that that's not the case.
It was not, she wasn't in the middle of a skirmish or anything like that. She was well away from the violence, or far enough away that it wasn't ruining the shot or the sound. And the line of the assembly of troops or National Guard weren't doing anything. It's not as if that they were in a high tense situation and just shooting anywhere. It was a deliberate turnaround to shoot at someone they didn't like, a journalist. And of course, the only people who don't like journalists are those who the journalist is rightly getting stuck into. So, it was just an appalling situation. I hope she's okay. Apparently she is. And I hope it doesn't affect her too much down the track.
And it just seems to be one thing after another in the United States at the moment. The bromance between Donald Trump and Elon Musk seems to be over. And it's a little bit like a soap opera, David. Will they get back together again? What will happen in the next episode? And it is like a soap opera, but we just have to remember that these two people are at the top of the most powerful country in the world at the moment. One was elected, one was not elected. And generally, this is not normal political behaviour. If we saw someone like Xi Jinping morph into a leader that keeps crapping on about make China great again, that type of leader, or getting up to ridiculous stunts, or having a spat with the head of Alibaba or TikTok, or dancing to the village people, aside from it being really unedifying, it would just diminish the leadership of China in the eyes of the world. And Trump has now got this nickname or acronym of TACO, which is Trump always chickens out. And he requested a phone call with Xi Jinping, the president of China, and he was granted a phone call, and then he refused to take it. And I think this shows a paucity of leadership that we've probably seen over the past 9-10 years. And this started off with Trump version 1 in 2016. It sort of continued in a different way with Joe Biden, who was barely functional and almost senile, but at least he behaved more like a normal president. And now we have Trump 2.0, who is all of the above: dysfunctional, illogical, unpredictable. He might be senile as well, but he is the president of the United States. So I'm not sure what the best outcome or the best course of action for Australia is here. It's almost like you have to humour the Mad King because he's incredibly powerful. But with the Mad King, you can always work out a strategy to get around this. It will take time and it will be a slow process anyway. But this would be the time to start making a shift away from the United States. The United States has ordered a review into the AUKUS deal, so has the government of Britain. Malcolm Turnbull said that Australia now needs to review the deal, so have the Australian Greens. And if Anthony Albanese really wants Australia to make its own decisions, as he suggested last week, well, I'd suggest that this is the time to start doing it, and he really needs to start making his own decisions.
we've long passed the stage of vassal state. Curtin said we turned to America free of any pangs of loyalty to Britain, but that was in 1943. Holt's declaration of all the way in with LBJ was 1966 or 67. From there, we should have been keeping America as a friend and an ally, that's all good, but moving away from the dependence. We have something happening at Pine Gap. We have all kinds of strange buildings that make no sense. It's clear that Australia is being used as a flanking device in American defence. But it's not good enough anymore. It's time for Australia to concentrate on the Pacific and the Indian Ocean rather than the concerns of the Atlantic Ocean.
Oh, but it's also a case where it's weird that the United States is reviewing AUKUS, Britain is reviewing AUKUS, and Australia is not.
So we're not.
So what happens? What happens if the United States and the UK decide to cancel AUKUS? Well, we can't say, well, no, we'll continue. We'll just call it the A deal. Scrap UK and US, but we'll keep the A in there. And we'll continue with it. Like, it's madness. Of course you've got to review it.
And, yeah, if the other two sides think, something's wrong, then, yes, let's have a look and work with them to work out a better deal with everyone. It's a deal that Boris Johnson brought in to get stuck into Emmanuel Macron, which Scott Morrison approved of, with no thought to what is better for Australia. It's just insane.
This is New Politics with Eddie Djokovic and David Lewis, the best podcast on Australian politics and news commentary. You can support us through Patreon and Substack, and also find us at newpolitics.com.au.
The Prime Minister gave an address at the National Press Club during the week, and he gave the broad brush strokes of what he hopes to achieve in this second term. He mainly talked about the issues that were brought up during the campaign and what the electorate had voted on.
On the 3rd of May, the Australian people voted for Australian values, for fairness, aspiration and opportunity for all, for a progressive patriotism where we are proud to do things our own way, where we recognise that our democracy, our commitment to fair wages and conditions, universal Medicare and universal superannuation are things that bring us together as Australians and set us apart from the world. And where we embrace the fact that one of the characteristics that makes this the best nation on earth is that all of us are driven by a determination to make it even better, to face global challenges, shape economic change and engage with our region in the Australian way, and to build a future where no one is held back and no one is left behind.
And given the size of the election victory, it's pretty clear that Labor has got a mandate to introduce all of these items. But whether or not that happens depends on what happens in the Senate during this next term. But the biggest announcement that Albanese made was the one about holding a productivity and economic growth summit, and that would bring together the government, business leaders, the union movement, community members, and the idea would be to build the broadest possible base of support for further economic reform and improve productivity. Now, it's unclear what direction this will all go in, but there are substantial changes that are going on within the workplace. There's a lot of technological changes. There's the introduction of artificial intelligence on a larger scale basis, and that's going to have a large effect across the board, including a lot of white-collar jobs and professional areas. So it's essential to have as many people included within this process, and it's best to work out what the common interests are and then work it out from there.
It's like there's a lack of forward thinking. It's like that now that they feel that they have a mandate to get things done, they better do everything without actually planning it through. This is the type of behaviour we got from the last mob. So it's quite odd. Now, let's be fair. The current government is streets ahead more competent than the last government, even if you don't agree with the government, with a few exceptions, are actually far more competent. But we'd like to see a bit more of that.
Yeah, so Labor did have a comprehensive election victory. It's the biggest ever in terms of seats won and also in terms of the gap between them and the opposition, and that's 51 seats. So you'd think that at the very least they should be able to implement the things that were discussed during the election campaign. They said that we're going to do this if we are re-elected, and they were re-elected quite comprehensively. So that's what the theory is, but we know that this never works out like this in practice. There's changing circumstances. There's also the Senate and how that will play out, although the Australian Greens do have new leadership and might not be as hostile as they were during the last parliament. But it's very clear that Labor did have an overwhelming victory. And we also have to remember that this was going into its second term, having this comprehensive victory. So this is the electorate saying that, yes, they want more of what the Labor government is proposing, not less. But on the productivity summit that Albanese has proposed, he's talking about tax reform, deregulation and streamlined major project approvals. And I was sort of thinking about that and I thought, oh, hang on, where have I heard this before? And it usually comes from the Liberal Party. And it can't be just all this regurgitated neoliberalism coloured in Labor Party red instead of the Liberal Party blue. It has to be reform that we should expect from a Labor government, sharing the burden more and placing more of that burden on those who can afford it, not on those who can't. And Albanese always likes to say, well, no one left behind and no one held back. So this is now the biggest test, and we'll find out soon enough whether this statement or this slogan is empty rhetoric or not.
Yeah, and we've got to hold them to account. They've been voted in twice now on a mandate of change. Now, it's not an overwhelming mandate when you look at the primary vote, yada, 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 but 94 seats in the lower house and a fairly soft minority in the upper house means that you can go big and you can aim high and have some of your stuff blocked by the Greens. Last term, they burnt up the political capital on nothing. This term, they've started burning it up on Woodside, making sure that our gas people get more money. The rhetoric has to match the action because we all know what walks, whereas money talks.
And just on those, well, this is getting away from those day-to-day political issues, but it sort of relates to that productivity summit, and I think that this will have to be quite a comprehensive summit. Now, it was probably just a bit of a footnote within the speech that Albanese made during the week, but I think that if Anthony Albanese is serious about this, this could end up being a far-reaching summit. But of course, we'll have to wait until we get there. And the reason is that the workplace dynamic is changing quite dramatically. And in the 1970s, there was a belief that through technological change and mechanisation, there was a strong belief that there would be less work required by the workforce because most of it would be done by machines. There'd be more leisure time, and if people weren't working as much, well, they'd have to receive a social wage to top things up, and that would be supported by the massive productivity and profits gained by mechanisation. And these were actually serious propositions at the time in the early 70s, late 1960s and the early 1970s in Australia and the United States. Richard Nixon and the Republican Party, they were seriously considering a universal basic income at the time based on all of these impending technological changes. Now, the technological change actually did arrive, but things went the other way. We started actually working more. We started working a lot more. And machines have been doing more of the manual work and moved humans into doing other sorts of work, more intellectually based work. But now that AI has come into it and is starting to take up a lot of that work as well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens because humans can do one of two things. They can either do manual physical work or intellectually based work, and machinery and AI technology is taking over those two fields. So there's not much left for us humans to do anymore. And I'm not sure if the Productivity Summit will include any books or information about Marxist theory or socialism, but to me the tide is turning quite dramatically because of this technological and AI-generated change. And this could end up being one of the most important summits that we've ever had if it's done properly.
The solutions to extreme poverty and hunger in Australia aren't that inaccessible. And a good summit will hopefully give good long-term answers. The trouble with a lot of our summits is that they become a talk fest for the already privileged, who end up somehow entrenching their own privileges and ignoring everything else. Hopefully, the government will take itself seriously, bring in the very best people, and come up with the very best solutions, or even good solutions. If I'm cynical, it's because we've seen this a few times, and it never quite works out the way we think. But you never know.
And we do like to jump all over the place at New Politics, and there was another big issue in federal politics that relates to world politics, and Australia has issued sanctions against two ministers in the Israeli government, and that's Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, and this is a part of a joint action by Britain, Canada, New Zealand and Norway. Here's the Foreign Minister, Senator Penny Wong, making the announcement.
Like Israel's military expansion in Gaza, illegal settlements and impunity for settler violence in the West Bank are extinguishing the prospects of a two-state solution. Now, I know that Australians feel frustrated. I know that people feel like we have little chance of moving the dial on our own, but this has never meant we can do nothing. What it does mean is we do what we can by working with partners, and that is what we have done. We do the work of building coalitions with other countries, because when Australia acts, we then act with impact. Together with our partners, Australia has opposed Israel's humanitarian blockade and expansion of military operations in Gaza. And together with our partners, we have opposed the expansion of settlements in the West Bank like those announced by the Netanyahu government just a couple of weeks ago. And together with our partners, we have imposed sanctions on Israeli settlers for their violence against Palestinians. So far, the Netanyahu government has ignored this international opposition. Now, just as when we applied those sanctions previously, and just as when we applied sanctions against Hamas for their terrorism, Australia never speculates about possible future sanctions. We apply them without warning because that makes them harder to evade. And overnight, we have done that. Australia has applied targeted financial sanctions and travel bans to two senior ministers in the Israeli government, Ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, for their role in serious human rights violations and abuses relating to Israeli settler violence in the West Bank.
And for me personally, this doesn't go far enough, but at least it's a start. We should have had the start 600 days ago, but we've got the start now. And predictably, it was condemned by the governments of Israel and the United States, and the Liberal Party also condemned these sanctions as well. Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister Michaela Cash has called on the Labor government to explain why it has targeted these two Israeli ministers. And Michaela Cash might not have been listening, but it's pretty obvious. It's for inciting violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. It's for serious human rights violations and abuses. And it's for building Israeli settlements in the West Bank in contravention of international law. So this is the start. There needs to be more of it. There's been over 600 days of extreme violence against the people of Palestine. And that's on top of the previous 80 years of violence against the people of Palestine. But every tiny bit of pressure needs to be applied, just as it was applied against South Africa all those years ago. And Israel just needs to be reminded by its allies that it is a rogue state and it's behaving like a rogue state. It's committing war crimes, and it just needs to work towards a peaceful resolution and a peaceful situation and recognising international law. And if it doesn't do this, well, it's just going to continue being labelled a rogue state.
Yeah, it committed an act of piracy in taking hold of a ship in international waters and kidnapping its occupants with the Greta Thunberg events. If they'd been in Israeli waters as opposed to Palestinian waters, they might have had a case. But in international waters, it's just not done. And even the worst nations in the world have stuck to the law of the sea, realising how it works both ways. What's to stop anti-Israeli forces now just randomly attacking Israeli ships in international waters? And no one wants either way. But it's way past time for Israel, and really it's the current government of Israel, to be sanctioned. And worse, we should be recalling their ambassador. We should be stopping trade. We should be not selling and buying arms we should be, all in all, making sure that every country in the world, to the best of our ability and resources, and given how close some of the ties we have to Israel seem to be, we should be making sure that they are held to account like we would every other country in the world. And if that means making some hard decisions regarding trade, regarding diplomatic relationships, then we should. And ignore those who say that the Palestinian civilians deserve everything they get. Ignore those saying that Israel is the promised land. Ignore those who are backing Israel because it suits them politically. Again, Labor needs to stand up and be a force for morality rather than a force for political expediency.
This is New Politics, available through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Audible and YouTube, and also available to support at Patreon, Substack, and at our website, newpolitics.com.au.
We're the devils from Tasmania, we're here once and for all. We're the side that's full of bark and bite, always hard at the ball. We're the team from Tassie Town, we fight the fight.
And just finishing up on some state politics, we discussed the idea of United States politics being a bit of a joke before, but Tasmanian politics has become a big joke as well. It's not as dramatic as the events in the United States, but if you want to see some incompetent politicians in action, Tasmania is the place to be, David. But there will be a state election in Tasmania on July the 19th, and this follows on from a vote of no confidence in the Premier, Jeremy Rockcliffe. And it wasn't entirely clear what was going to happen here because the Premier went to see the Governor of Tasmania, Barbara Baker, earlier on in the week to request an early election. He was told to go home, and then she called in the Labor leader, Dean Winter, to see if he could form government. And he said, no thanks, not with the Tasmania Greens. Then Jeremy Rockcliffe was called back in to see the Governor, and then the election was announced. And most of this instability has been created by the proposal to build an AFL stadium at the cost of $1 billion to host the new AFL team in Tasmania, which is coming in 2028. That's 3 years away. It's a stadium that's unaffordable, it's not wanted, and it will probably be a wasted asset as well. Now, the AFL, they didn't actually want to have a team based in Tasmania because it's not economical, and politically, they couldn't really say that they couldn't support a team in Tasmania because there's a lot of AFL players within the AFL system who do come from Tasmania, and they suggested this outrageous proposal that if there is to be an AFL team in Tasmania, well, you got to build this brand new expensive stadium that nobody wants and nobody needs at an absolutely massive cost that Tasmania cannot afford. And quite rightly expected that no one in their right mind within the Tasmanian government would support such a stupid proposal. But the AFL forgot that Jeremy Rockcliffe also proposed a chocolate fountain at the last election. So it seems like he'll say yes to absolutely everything. But the AFL thought that the Tasmanian government would say no, but they ended up saying yes to this ridiculous stadium proposal. And that's why Jeremy Rockcliffe and the Liberal Party is in a world of pain at the moment.
You almost expect Rhonda and Jim from Utopia to turn up to get Tony from Nation Building Authority to explain why this is happening after he's opposed it all the way through. The scriptwriters of Utopia must just be shaking their head saying, we can't do any more ridiculous than this. How do we do another season? Let's just get our head around this. It's a stadium that nobody wants, that will have no material benefit, that will take away from things that will give material benefit and comfort to Tasmanians, and that will likely house a team that will spend most of its time playing on the mainland because they can't get the crowds from the mainland to get to Tasmania as much as they would like. Now, Tasmania is a great state. I've been there several times. I love going down there, and I hope to get back down there soon. But it's in a shambles at the moment, and it doesn't seem as if either side of politics is prepared to get up and lead. Now, the simple thing to do is to say, yep, all contracts are off. We can live without an AFL team for the moment. And I think most Tasmanians would say, yeah, it'd be nice to have our own team, but it's not feasible. When it's feasible, let's go for it. But until then, let's keep watching the mainland states fight it out, and we'll pick our teams based on whether we're in the east or the west of Tasmania, Adelaide's or the Melbournes or whomever. It's also this weird thing that some sporting organisations have, that they feel that they are so popular and so needed that they can just use the government as an ATM. Every time people say, oh, maybe we should look at these Olympic bids, the Olympic Committee jumps up and down saying you can't take any money off us, when nobody has suggested that at that point. The AFL and the NRL particularly love stadiums. And it was a stadium that really was the final nail in the coffin for Alan Jones. And before you say, what about all those accusations? He was gone before the accusations came out. The accusations were just to make sure that he wasn't coming back. It's so bizarre. And to risk the economy over, it's not as if they said, oh, we need 3 hospitals, but we can only afford 2. No, we're going to build the 3. Or we're going to completely revitalise the public education system so that it's more equitable. And you could do all this for the cost of the stadium. We're going to hire more public servants because things have been running on a shoestring for so long. We need more people, which improves jobs, which improves the economy, which, again, for the price of the stadium, you could do quite a lot of good there. It's head-shakingly bizarre. It's almost funny.
It's almost funny, but not in a in a good way.
Yeah.
But you're right about Tasmania. Tasmania is a wonderful place. It's a wonderful state. We've got a lot of family and friends down there. So hello to all of those people that we know down in Tasmania. But the politics of the place stinks. And a lot of people in our audience have asked us, well, why has Tasmania got all of these problems with its political processes? And I think it's because Tasmania just hasn't got enough people for the quality of parliament that's required in that state. There's just not enough scrutiny on the political decisions that are made down there and on the government actions. And there was also that long history of both the Liberal Party and the Labor Party being ruled by the forestry industry as well. But there's just not enough checks and balances that are going on down there. And someone should have said to Jeremy Rockcliffe, no, mate, you're not going to get your AFL team in Tasmania. You're not going to get to build that $1 billion stadium. Grow up and get real. Put that $1 billion into supporting the people of Tasmania, not into some stupid stadium deal. And Tasmania has been a bit of a political basket case for some time. Not the people, not the place itself. It's a fantastic state. There is some really, really good people in Tasmania, but it's the political class that leaves a lot to be desired. And I'm not sure what the solution is. Maybe Tasmania and Victoria needs to be combined into the one state. That might take a bit of work, and also you need to have a referendum to change the constitution to enable that. But there's just too much instability in Tasmania politically. This will be the 4th election in 7 years. Maybe the Hare-Clark proportional representation system isn't suitable for Tasmania. The Liberal Party currently holds 14 seats, Labor holds 10 seats, and the Greens hold 5, and I think there's 6 independents. So I think that makes up 35 seats. And a leader who has suffered a vote of no confidence rarely goes on to win an election, and that's the situation for Jeremy Rockcliffe. He's got a vote of no confidence against him, and there's been a lot of bad news for the Liberal Party over the past few years, but I've just got a feeling that there's going to be some more bad news coming their way. It's not going to be looking good for them on July the 19th at that state election.
We're watching the death of the Liberal Party, of course, and this isn't helping it. They're a rump in Western Australia, they're a basket case in Victoria, they're a basket case in Tasmania. They're struggling in New South Wales, but at least there's some signs of life with a more moderate, although the civil wars started and the radical wings of the Liberal Party in New South Wales are trying to get control back. South Australia, they're not gone, but they're not in any way near shape for government. And so we're seeing this happening too. It seems particularly bizarre in Tasmania because it's not an issue of real principle. And maybe Jeremy Rockcliffe is a completely devoted and passionate AFL fan who thinks that every major city in Australia should have an AFL team with $1 billion. But I get the sense that he's played the card thinking that Tasmanians want this AFL team, has discovered that, in fact, at the moment they don't. They may aspire to one, but at the moment now's not the time. So he, instead of putting it away quietly, he's doubled down on it. And who knows what deals he's made with contractors and builders and the AFL and whatever other vested interests there are. And he's found himself in a position where he's going to be hammered, even in a Hare-Clark system, he's going to be hammered in the next election.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you'd like to support our style of journalism and commentary, please make a donation at our website at newpolitics.com.au. We don't beg, plead, beseech or gaslight you about journalism coming to an end. We just keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.